Okay then, so this institution, the Council of European Union, used to be known as the Council of Ministers, which I think, in terms of understanding, was a slightly easier title. But anyway, some key features about this institution is firstly, it is intergovernmental. Okay, so it basically serves the interests of member states largely. If I can make that. Okay, so it's intergovernmental, and it's also part executive and part legislative as well. So this is one of those institutions which covers two areas. So it has some kind of executive function and some legislative function. The membership of this institution, which is why I think the Council of Ministers was a better title, was that government ministers from each of the member states attend these meetings. So if, for example, they're discussing an issue to do with agriculture, then all the agriculture ministers from across the EU will attend that particular meeting to discuss that particular issue. Or if they're discussing something to do with finance and money, then obviously all the chancellors or finance ministers of each member state will attend. So so that's who attends these meetings. Oops, what have I done there? Along with the European Parliament, the Council also examines proposed laws which have been decided by the European Commission. So where we said about before how the European Commission produces those directives and those regulations, well, they don't go into law and effect straight away. They go to both the European Parliament, which we'll come to in a few minutes, and the Council of the European Union. And they examine those proposed laws and initiatives from the European Commission. And again, you can see how national interest comes to play here, because if the European Commission has a regulation it wants to introduce or a directive it wants to introduce which might upset a certain member state, then obviously those ministers at the Council of the European Union can then act to dilute it or get rid of it or whatever. And this is where you get a slight controversy comes in here as well, because some issues from the Council of the European Union are unanimous, i.e. every member state must agree. But increasingly, and then again this was something that was introduced at the Single European Act of 1986 and was beefed up again at the Maastricht Treaty, was something called qualified majority voting. In other words, some directives, some regulations from the European Commission, when they come to the Council of the European Union, they might be accepted whereby not every member state might agree. Again, it's on certain issues. It's a very complicated formula for working out this majority voting, but essentially a number of issues don't require unanimous voting, which critics of the European Union say dilutes the influence of member states, because you could vote no on a directive or a regulation but not actually stop it because you're in a minority of one or whatever. As I said, I won't go into the details of QM fees because it's very complicated. It's all to do with the size of the member state and all that kind of hoo-ha. But the general point is made there. So again, if you're in a question about devolution, and a critic that's made of the European Union from a sovereignty point of view is the fact that Britain can be outvoted, or could be outvoted, at the Council of the European Union. Okay, the other big institution, and again it's an institution that's been growing in size both numerically and also in power, is the European Parliament. Okay, this is a supranational institution, so again it serves the interests of the European Union, but as we know its members are made up from each of the member states. It's a purely legislative institution, so dealing with legislation. And it's directly elected by the people every 5 years. Now, up until when Britain left, there were 751 members of the European Parliament. From memory, I can't remember how many Britain have 60 members. It was something like that, wasn't it? It's obviously 600 odd now. But again, it's a big body, 751 members of this institution. Now, interestingly, the European Parliament, unlike a lot of other legislatures, cannot initiate new laws. Okay, they're purely reactive from regulations and directives that have been decided elsewhere, whether usually at the European Commission level. It can amend initiatives and directives from the European Commission, and it can veto proposed legislation, i.e. regulations and directives. But it cannot actually produce its own new nice shiny ones itself. So that's a major weakness of the European Parliament compared to all national parliaments. Its other main function is that it shares budgetary authority with the Council of the EU. So again, it's in charge, or it looks over the budget, i.e. the spending of the European Union. And again, it can have power to make amendments to that budget and veto it if they're really unhappy with it. Okay. Just like most other legislatures, they can scrutinise the executive. So in this case, they can scrutinise the European Commission. Obviously, they can't scrutinise heads of state in the council in the council and all the rest of it, but they can scrutinise members of the Commission, bring them in to be questioned, etc., etc. Interestingly, they also elect the president of the European Commission. So again, in some way, that's another form of scrutiny which it has. So they can decide who they want to be in charge of the European Commission. They can question the nominees to the Commission. So, when David Cameron wanted Jonathan Hill to be the EU Commissioner from the UK, he could have faced questions from the European Commission. He could face questions from the European Parliament to find out his credentials. Was he worthy of being in charge of finance, etc., etc. Okay, and you can also question commissioners as well at the European Parliament. So again, these are relatively new powers, these questioning ones. I know when I wrote my essay on the European Parliament back in 1995, wherever it was, I don't remember having these particular roles and functions. And the final institution, which again is very controversial, and again you hear quite a lot, Mark mentioned it quite a lot regarding why we should leave the EU and all that kind of doodah, is the European Court of Justice. This institution, its main function is to make sure that EU law is followed uniformly by all member states. As we know, EU law is superior to member state law. Okay, so there's a conflict between EU law and member state law. EU law takes precedence, and this institution can fine member states if they feel that they are not following through EU law. Some of the judges in the past have been British, so you do get, the judges are not all from one country, they are spread across the entire European Union. And it also deals with disputes between member states as well. So if Britain and France have some dispute, then the European Court of Justice would be the final kind of arbiter. And again, this fits into the sovereignty issue, isn't it? Because, sometimes the European Court of Justice has told off Britain or fined Britain or told Britain to change some national laws because they are not kind of implementing EU law properly. And again, you may have heard quite often in the Brexit debate people, especially on the political right, saying, we want to leave the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And the reason is because it's unelected judges, just like in the UK, who are telling the member states what they can and cannot do. Defenders, though, would say, well, that's because the member states have voluntarily signed up to these treaties to join the European Union and develop the European Union, and therefore all they're doing is enforcing the treaties which have been agreed to by national member states. Okay, so the process for lawmaking then, and passing a law in the EU, is a rather complicated business. So basically the European Commission propose a draft law. Okay, it then goes to two places, the Council of the European Union and the European Parliament, who might scrutinise and look over that draft regulation or whatever it happens to be. And then it's up to the member states themselves to actually implement it. And actually, one argument you can make against the European Union is actually it does not have enough civil servants. They're very much reliant upon the member states to actually introduce laws, regulations and directives. And again, I suppose the European Court of Justice fits into this to make sure that's all taking place. So, yeah, fairly simple kind of process, I would have thought. Okay then, so that does us then about the institutions of the European Union. As I said, there won't be an exact exam question on this, like, what the merits of the European Commission compared to the Council of Europe or whatever. but it does fit into arguments about things like sovereignty, etc., etc. Now, what I'd like to do for Thursday when I do the next video is there's some questions based on these institutions which you need to answer, which is based off this PowerPoint basically and what I've kind of been gambiting on about. And it includes stuff as well about the democratic deficit. In fact, I think the heading in your booklet's on about the democratic deficit. So have a go at doing those questions. Hopefully they're fairly straightforward. Think about areas where democracy is perhaps a bit weak in the European Union, because again that's sometimes an argument made against the EU about this democratic deficit. There is a graph at the end which shows the numbers of people who voted in various elections as well. I haven't put on the last European elections because I did the booklet before that happened. I think there was an increase actually, so you might want to find out what the last percentage voted was from the EU, from Britain and other member states. So I want you to do that. Then really important, because there's a bullet point on this, it's about how has the UK adapted legislation to fit into the European Union. In other words, how has our decision making in the UK been affected by membership of the EU? What kind of little bodies and committees have been set up to try and deal with the EU and make sure that laws which we're passing at Westminster are kind of compliant with the EU. And you have to use the Edexcel textbook. I think it's 219 to 221. I think it's on the top of the sheet for doing that. And again, that is a particular bullet point on the exam specification. And then finally, there's then 2 pages, because what you need to know, again, if you look at the exam specification, it said you need to know about the impact of, I think it says 2 policies of the European Union on the UK and how the EU has affected the UK. So what I want you to do is about the Common Agricultural Policy, the Common Fisheries Policy and the Social Chapter. There's 2 pages or so in your booklets on this, and it refers to bits of pages to use from the Lynch book and the Edexcel book. I think it refers to as well some videos on Moodle. They are now on Teams. So have a look at that collection of videos and have a read of the various books to do that. I mean, the Common Agricultural Policy is really complicated. I mean, don't get too bogged down, I won't say in the weeds of it, which would be rather amusing for agriculture. It's just to get a sense of it and to get a sense of how has this policy affected UK and UK farming. Okay, so they're the bits I want you to do. There is some bits on Brexit as well, which we'll do on Thursday. So for Thursday, if you get all those bits done for me, that would be great. That means we can finish off the EU on Thursday. I can then go on about sovereignty this time next week, and then we've done all the content for the first year of politics. Okay, any problems, any issues, then please let me know.